So it's been a minute since I recorded my last video. By the way, there's some weird flicker going on with my camera on my laptop. I have no idea what's causing it, so we'll just run with it. Weird artifact. It's going to bug the hell out of me for reasons I'll get into, but I'll make it work. It's been a minute since I recorded my last video. I used to say to weaponize what I was doing against people who heckled me. It's Bo Spira, the weirdest guy on the internet, weirdest guy on YouTube, and possibly the internet. Not going to do that this time. I thought weaponize the catchphrase, but I'm just basically enabling ableism when I do that. Now, I'm going to keep this unscripted, like a lot of my other videos. I think it's important. I didn't really get why I was doing that before, but I think it's important to put an unfiltered face on what the autism spectrum can look like. Oh yeah, I've got about 2 years worth of stuff condensed to bring into things. I hadn't realized that my last video was before August 2022. I'm not sure how many people will get this because YouTube algorithm, but anyway, now I'm gonna look away from the screen, trying with eye contact. We'll get into all why all that is later on. But I'm just gonna look away from the screen for a minute because I want to check I've got something exact. So a video came on. Just I'm in the middle of watching it actually. I just stopped because I wanted to throw something into the mix. I've recently come across a YouTube channel called I'm Autistic. Now what? And the video I'm watching is You're Not Autistic, You're Just Privileged. Now, I'll put that down in the description. Um, if you're interested in autism, definitely check them out. She's amazing. Looking at all of this, I don't necessarily agree with some of how political worldview is, purely because at the end of the day, among other things, when you start looking into feminism, well, you start minimizing ableism as just straight white male privilege backfiring. Or worse still, when you're looking at patriarchal dominance theory, you have a model that can only maintain internal consistency when you have a woman or a girl abusing a man or a boy with a disability by essentially arguing that the victim's mere existence suppressed their abusers into abusing them, which, let's face it, is the very same useless eaters argument that Hitler used to mass sterilize about 400,000 of those of us with disabilities from 1934, and then between 1939 with the trial balloon murder of Gerhard Herbert Kretschmer, formerly known as the Nauer child, I think is the pronunciation for that, followed by the mass murder through starvation and exposure of 7,000 children with disabilities in German teaching hospitals. And then following that, the mass murder of about 300,000 adults with disabilities in what were known as quote unquote research hospitals. They're about as much about that as the death camps were quote unquote holiday camps. And we were mass murdered in a number of ways, not stimming, just itchy, by the way. We were mass murdered in a number of different ways. Initially, it was tying us up naked in groups of 20 to 40 and then blowing us up with dynamite. And then when the quote-unquote bad guys of World War II, because Hitler, because YouTube likes to censor, decided that was quote-unquote too messy, they created the very gas chambers that as of around 2 years later, they would go on to mass murder 5.8 million Jews with. I cannot support any ideology, no matter how well-meaning it is, no matter how well-meaning what you want to do is. Like, it's absolutely commendable if you want to do things like stopping male abusers from terrorizing, their wives, their girlfriends, their children. Absolutely, we should want to stop that. But don't for 1 minute pretend that that justifies adopting a model, an ideological framework that descends into what can accurately be described as, to phrase this in YouTube-friendly terms, a neo-Yahtzee dog whistle. And when you are arguing the useless eaters argument, either covertly or overtly, it's essentially the same as arguing for gassing a certain group of people. Again, we all know the phrase because it's recently come up in the wake of the was it October 7? I'm trying to remember the exact date. Horrific attack by Hamas in Israel. I've got my own complex thoughts about that conflict, but I'm getting way off track. I already am. Anyway, I just wanted to throw my hat in the ring and talk about what they're talking about, what I'm Autistic Now What is talking about. Just double checking, yes, that was the channel. And I just want to throw my own history of diagnoses into the mix because I think it's important to understand why a missing generation exists. But I want to actually throw a bit of diagnostic history on autism into the mix before I do that. The original autism diagnosis was by a Dr. Hans Asperger in Yahtzee, Germany. It actually resulted from a screening tool for the Holocaust. Yeah, kind of like how the V2 gave us the trip to the moon. Isn't it interesting the way that that horrific period of history has been a mixed bag. I mean, I still don't think the good outweighs the bad by a long shot, but oh, it's interesting some of the stuff that comes from war. Especially when I consider that, you know, if Nobel was aware that dynamite was used in the research hospitals, that probably was one of the uses of dynamite that contributed to the Nobel Peace Prize being funded by him. Anyway, you have autism being recognized in 1944 in Germany. 1978 or 79 rolls around. And you get what I would describe as the middle child of autism spectrum disorders and arguably the worst diagnostic name in the history of medicine or psychology. Pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, or short PDD-NOS or PDD-NOS, as a lot of us will refer to it. 1994, Asperger's gets discovered. Around the 1990s too, you wind up a situation where, I forget the original name for it, but ADD and ADHD had been recognized, now known as ADHD inattentive type, the most oxymoronic diagnosis name ever, and ADHD, which is now ADHD hyperactivity type. Talk about a tautology. Anyway, you get to 2013, and suddenly the medical profession has this light bulb moment. Oh, wait. PDD-NOS, autism, and Asperger's. Hang on, aren't they the same thing, just different? And so what you wind up with is this course correction that says, okay, we've got a disease, we've got a disorder. I'm fine with autism being called a disease or a disorder. It doesn't worry me, it might worry others, but you know, at the end of the day, there's something there, and there's something that needs addressing, especially in our world, so have at it, I guess. You know, I don't think we can be too precious about some things if it's being done in the right way or for the right reasons. Anyway, they realize, hang on a minute here, we've been looking at the same thing from 3 different angles, and it manifests in a whole heap of weird and wacky ways. We need to take these 3 diagnoses, and we need to put them under a single umbrella and call it a spectrum disorder. The reason for that is that people think, and there's a great meme, I might even link this in the description, that autism is like this single line where you are more autistic or less autistic. In reality, imagine a graphic equalizer in the shape of a wheel. And, you know, you may have executive function issues, you may have sensory issues, you may have communication issues, fine motor coordination issues, all of these different things. And so the recognition was, okay, all of it is autism spectrum disorder. Now, the other thing that they discovered with this was that ADD and ADHD, I refuse to use ADHD inattentive type. Seriously, guys, what were you thinking with that? But basically, ADD, ADHD, and autism spectrum disorders all had 70% of the same symptoms. Now, the problem is, as you can imagine, with the medical profession not getting it right, um, there were a lot of people that got missed, and I was one of them, and that's in spite of everything. And I want to give this story to give people an idea of just how someone could be a part of the missing generation in terms of people with autism, adults with autism diagnosed late, um, in a way that really shouldn't be happening. You know, it should not have happened. There is one other story I want to bring up too. There was I was briefly a part of an autism spectrum, autism support group, adult support group. It kind of folded. The coordinator got another role and couldn't run the group anymore. And the guy brought up in there that his autism diagnoses. I mean, we talk about you know men and boys being more diagnosed than women and girls. Yet his diagnosis as an adult came about as the result of him sitting in on his daughter's autism diagnosis. True story. So, by the way, that's one of the reasons why I completely, fundamentally push back against an argument that autism was always seen as a boy's disease. Because the reality is that far too many of us who are men and boys with autism fell through the cracks because we did not look like Rain Man, basically. Autism was seen as a boys and men and boys who look like Rain Man, who present like Rain Man disease. If you didn't do that, you were out. Didn't matter whether you were a boy or a girl, a man or a woman with autism. If you didn't present like Rain Man, that was it. And I want to actually talk about my own history, diagnostic history here for a minute, and to put my own Vineland scores out here just to prove a point. Um, so I was born 79, seemed like a happy, healthy, well-adjusted child, and mum started to notice issues when I was in around peers. I just seemed to fall a bit behind, and mum took me to a pediatrician who the first one said, "Well, if you had more kids, you wouldn't have time to worry." I'll leave people to react at the number of different ways that bad take can be taken as a what the heck. But anyway, my mother wasn't giving up and took me to another pediatrician. They said, yeah, there's developmental delays. We need to get him in occupational therapy. I was always very articulate, so speech pathology was never an issue for me. And to jump ahead a bit, I'll come back to it, but with PDD-NOS, which I'll get to, generally speaking, the two standard treatments for it are occupational therapy and speech pathology. That's the standard stuff that goes into it. And so I went through occupational therapy and did that through most of primary school, actually. Anyway, I get into kindergarten and I've got a kindergarten teacher that can't quite place me. I'm falling behind in some areas, then I'm brilliant in other areas. And so at a biological age of 3, I was assessed by the Education Unit of in Sydney, Australia, of Department of Education. At the time, I had a biological age of 5.3. Now, I can't remember whether my reading age was 6.9 and my maths age was 7.8, or it was the other way around. But I had a fine motor coordination skills age of 3.9. Again, that's something that's pretty standard with PDD-NOS. And so I kept going to occupational therapy, kept going to see all these specialists as I went through primary school. As I understand it, my folder that the school had by the time I was in year 6 was about 20 centimeters. What? That's probably more 20 centimeters. 20 centimeters thick, and had about over a century of professional experience contained within it. Year 5, the school special ed teacher who the school had just taken on board, pardon me, They had me go to a psychologist, and the psychologist noted that the special ed teacher seemed noted, I was on quote unquote the fringes of the playground. And the psychologist met with mum and dad, and I met with me, and they came to the conclusion that I just was not reading social cues, but I was highly intelligent. It was one of those things too, where because I was a really intelligent kid, adults, the novelty of it, wanted to talk to you and stuff, whereas other kids are like, I don't want to talk about that. Go away. But yeah, I go into high school and I'm slow on a couple of tests, and so they send me off to and because of that, I wind up going to Sydney Children's Hospital to an evaluation with who is now the former head of psychology at Sydney Children's Hospital. Um, she does an assessment and she says, quote unquote, ADD for want of a better category. Now, a couple of years later, mum goes through, and mum's at my old primary school, and Dr. Paul Duffy, who was one of the two pioneers, along with Professor Serpentine, in childhood ADD and autism in the 1990s, rethinking a lot of it, going, hang on, we need to look at it this way, is giving a talk because one of the kids at the primary school has been diagnosed with autism, what we would now call level 3 autism, probably. Anyway, mum's there, and as Dr. Duffy's talking, she keeps recognizing me more and more in what is being said. And so she books me in for an appointment 5 weeks before my 15th birthday, and I'm diagnosed with ADD, but very mild. I'm put on Ritalin, initially 10 milligrams, doesn't quite work, put me on 15. And like it was boosting my mental abilities, like my grades shot up. But I wasn't dealing with the social stuff. And they were noting I was probably a little bit manic, etc. Which is probably what happens when you put someone with autism on amphetamines due to a misdiagnosis. But it never really got diagnosed. I switched from Ritalin to Dex in year 12 because Ritalin wasn't medically subsidized in Australia. Dexamphetamine was. Ritalin worked, Dex didn't. A year later, due to other things going on, put back on Ritalin. Ritalin stopped working about 18 months after the track, and like it was like taking a drug at that point. I could feel it, jump, mental energy up here, and about half an hour before the 4 hours I need to take the next lot of medication, absolute crash. So at the age of 20, I think it was, yeah, 1999, that's right. A little after I turned 20, I took myself off medication. At that point, as far as I was aware, I had ADD. There were only two treatments, neither of them worked, so there was no point in seeing anyone, no point in trying to take medication, and I just made the best of it. Um, and so, worked retail for several years, fell through the cracks, you know, and let's face it, if you're autistic, etc., retail is the worst place for you. Oh, that's another story for another time. Anyway, so I get to about, I'm trying to think. Yeah, 2017, that's right. I'm not usually a fan of Power Rangers and shifting things around, etc. Race swapping, gender swapping. I've got very specific rules on that. Basically, when it comes to representation as opposed to tokenism, one, no hand-me-downs, original compelling characters. Two, it's a story, not a lecture. Actually have storycraft, construct your lore properly, etc. So that you suspend disbelief. Um, Several Transformers continuities I'm looking at you. Ironically, the one Transformers continuity I'm not looking at, which will really make Transformers fans rage for several different reasons, is Beast Machines, because it actually did an exceptional job of explaining why you could have male and female Transformers in any kind of romantic relationship. Heck, they could even biologically breed if you followed the logic of organic transformers through. That's another story. Okay, anyway, number 3. Yes, I might have a disability, but I am so much more than my disability. A character that is a certain thing cannot be a trope. And number four. Number four is, yes, we may be a certain type of minority due to a condition, but we're all different. Anyway, number five for me is don't be a hypocrite. If I'm not going to talk, if something doesn't meet the standards for me for disability, and I'm not okay with it, if something doesn't meet those standards with LGBT representation, race representation, sex representation either, I'm a hypocrite if I don't go, hang on, that's not beating the bar either. That's a very autistic thing, or maybe, but sorry, not sorry. It's just trying to be fair, trying to be accurate and saying, well, if I deserve a certain level of representation, so does everyone else. But I digress. As much as there were some cheap virtue signaling issues in there for the sake of it with the Power Rangers movie, actually formally making Billy neurodiverse was an interesting moment for me. Billy actually said, well, I'm on the spectrum, and the way that David Yost always played him was a little bit neurodiverse. And I don't understand social cues. And it was one of those things where it was like a light bulb moment went off with me. I mean, when I'd heard about Asperger's, I thought, well, maybe, but I didn't really give it much thought. It's like, yeah, probably, but I can't really, it's not really affecting me. But as that year went on, I realized I need a diagnosis. I need to try to get this checked out. I need to get this helped. The problem I had was that in Australia, childhood autism diagnoses are funded, but adult ones aren't. And so it took me, like, what was it from that point? 4.5 years, 5 years, yeah, about 5 years to get a diagnosis. And it was only through working through an advocacy organization as part of a submission for the Disability Royal Commission that I was actually able to find an organization that would subsidize that $2,500 autism spectrum disorder diagnosis to the tune of 80% of it, where I only had to find $500, which, we made happen. Anyway, those Vineland scores were interesting. So for those who aren't aware, anything over 70 is level 1 autism spectrum disorder. Anything over 110, you're not on the spectrum, basically. Anything between 69 and I think it's 50, level 2 autism spectrum disorder. Anything under 50, level 3. When the DSM-V happened, basically, over 70 was Asperger's. That middle grade was PDD-NOS, and the lower end was quote unquote autism. Anyway, my Vineland scores came back, and it was communication 71. It was daily life skills 63, socialization 52, and that led to an overall score of 63. Overall score, sorry, of 62 on average. If you're under 9, they take fine motor coordination skills, which is why I brought up things earlier on. But if you're over the age of 9, they don't. However, that's also interesting as well. So basically, my socialization deficits are below, well, just above level 3 autism spectrum disorder, just above what was traditionally called autistic. And yeah, I'm literally autistic. According to the Vineland 3 categories, which I think are mild, severe, and catastrophic or extreme. I can't remember what the third one is. I am severely autistic. So if you see me stimming, like, yeah, because I'm nervous. It's a stim. It's the way the mind works to try to stabilize, to function. But the interesting thing with that was I had to be self-diagnosed for about 5 years. And even now, what I'm autistic now, what as said is true. Even when you mention an autism diagnosis, so many people out there act like autism somehow means you're a brain-damaged 5-year-old with an IQ barely above room temperature. I mean, it's just horrendous. And it just really, really is. And and you get people like that race baiting. Well, he hasn't actually race, but he sort of has. I mean, talking about white people being privileged. Yeah, okay, no, I take it back. He's absolutely race baiting, race hustling. grifting. Unlike that race grifter. Um, the reality, the reality is that so many people with autism have to self-diagnose because autism diagnoses for adults are not funded. Now, I'm sure Americans who believe that healthcare should be for profit, rather than recognizing that there are some parts of the economy you need to facilitate, use as drivers and facilitators so you can maximize your profit making areas in other areas. Like, for example, you really don't want private companies handling your roads because then it's eating into the ability of businesses to be able to transport goods, or more to the point, you don't want corporate police. I mean, we all saw OCP in RoboCop. But yeah, we have a problem in the world. We have an entire generation of those of us with autism that were missed by the system. And you look at my situation, I shouldn't have been missed. Dr. Duffy was one of the foremost experts on ADD and autism. Didn't confirm PDD-NOS. I'm looking back at my records. I strongly suspect there's something there we don't know, which was how it was described to me. The treatments I was assigned, why I wouldn't have been assigned one of those two treatments, etc. The social cue issues, etc. I'm almost convinced that I had been given a PDD-NOS diagnosis as an infant, but it just hadn't been explained to my mother properly. And when you've got that, you're going to have a parent who's constantly looking for other specialists to go, well, what is it? If you can't tell me what it is, if you're saying there's something there, but what is it? Well, I need to go find someone else who can tell me what it is. So I'm almost convinced, looking at the treatments, looking at how my mother reacted to what she was told I had, looking at the social cue issues, because with PDD-NOS, reading social cues can actually be worse than with people with autism. When I look at all these things, it's realistically, it probably was PDD-NOS I was diagnosed with as a kid. One of the leading experts on childhood autism and ADD missed it, diagnosed me with something else, which had 70% of the same symptoms. And then it took until I was 43 years old for them to get it right. So, people are talking about, why are all these people suddenly coming up saying they're autistic and self-diagnosing, etc.? Well, it's because so many people were missed, and trying to get the funding to get the diagnoses is really difficult. And I absolutely think the solution is make diagnoses financially accessible, because people are going, we don't want people to live off the system, we don't want people to live on welfare, etc. Well, the way you stop people living off welfare is you give them the tools, you give them the capacity to be productive members of society. People talk about, oh, you work hard, etc. Well, if you look at countries as a business, they've got to manage their assets. They've got to say, okay, we're not maximizing this asset. This asset is sitting here doing nothing. It's not being used to its full potential. And I hate to dehumanize people with it, but that's essentially what's being said. And so, yeah, I think we've got to make the solution to self-diagnoses being taken out of the picture, because I don't think it's helpful. I think it can be as an initial step to say, I think I need a formal diagnosis. But keeping people in self-diagnosis isn't helpful. It opens the place up to bad actors. It reinforces the whole you don't look autistic thing, which you still get when you have a diagnosis. People still act like, oh, you don't look like Rain Man. You still get all that. Or you get, oh, he's a really cool guy, but he's just out there. Or mocked. Or eye rolls. All that kind of stuff. Even when you've got your diagnosis. So I think we really need to make formal diagnoses accessible. We've got to recognize as a society, there's a whole generation of people like me who are sitting in the cracks. And you're looking and going, well, hang on, why aren't these people working hard? Well, you've got to recognize where people might need tools to be able to work hard, where people might need to be placed in the right areas. Now, if you've got someone who's falling through the cracks and doing minimum wage retail and it's not serving them, but with training, etc., they could be doing a much better job of other things, being much more productive in society, innovating, because let's face it, those with autism are great for thinking outside the box. How's that person going to do anything other than fall through the cracks, claw their way up out of the crack, try something else again, only to be shoved back down in the crack? That's literally what's going to happen. And so with people going, oh, um, why are all these people self-diagnosing? It's because they have to. Because there's no reasonable alternative. And that needs to change. And to everyone out there going, oh, there's no such thing as autism. You're not. You just want to feel special. You've got no bloody idea what you're talking about. There's nothing special about being indecently assaulted or sexually assaulted in high school and then having the school put you in your place with an institutionalized child sexual abuse cover-up, which the Child Abuse Royal Commission compares to the Knox grammar scandal. There's nothing special about having people in that school become so ableist towards you that they decide that you need to be put in your place by them sneaking up with you with a plastic bag and trying to suffocate you with it because they think it's funny. There's nothing special about enduring a lifetime of workplace bullying and family bullying where people convince you that you need to be put in your place, namely 6 feet under, because you dare to be neurodiverse and exist. There's nothing special about being beaten to death, nearly beaten to death, I should say. I mean, I almost was. And sitting in a hospital for hours on end while you're ignored, passing in and out of consciousness because you've got severe head injuries. And then when you complain about it, a week later, when the hospital should have been sued, heads should have rolled because I could have been dead, having people turn around and gaslight you and claim that you brought yourself in even though you were rushed to hospital in an ambulance. There's nothing special about being a textbook example of why having a neurological, an intellectual or psychological disability, including a psychosocial disability, is the biggest predictor of being the victim of psychological partner violence, including coercive control, which can all too easily lead to physical partner violence, as in domestic violence. And then being told, well, it was all your fault because you oppressed your abuser or abusing you for daring to exist. Or when it's male, well, that was just you being male coming back to bite you in the ass. There's nothing special about any of that. None of it. So I don't, I think it really is telling that so many of these race baiters out there would absolutely be chomping at the bit to tear someone apart a million ways from sundown if someone even remotely said that the horrific actions of the Ku Klux Klan, for example, were entirely justified, and that, and this is horrific, but it is a hypothetical, that it happening to those people, those horrific, sickening acts, was nothing more. And yeah, this is exactly how sickening it is, and I'm deliberately breaking it up following Tim Paul's stroke, than them not having disability coming back to bite them in the ass. That is basically what that argument argues. That's what, when you argue that horror is being privilege backfiring, means. You're arguing that it is a certain trait coming back to bite them in the ass, that they had it coming to them. We don't tolerate it when it comes to horrors that are inflicted on women, when it comes to horrors that are inflicted on people of color or other minorities, but apparently when it's politically convenient, we'll tolerate it for people with disabilities. The reality is that we are, sadly, heading towards Yahtzee Germany. There are so many examples in society of Um, those with disabilities being viewed as useless eaters in one form or another. Oh, there'd be a burden on others, all that kind of talk, unsustainable burdens, yada yada yada. Um, or killing is a kindness. Would you want to live if you were like that? And it's from before we've left the womb to even trying to kill us now after we've left the womb. I know what has been said about made in Canada. Even I think it was Forbes compared it to Yahtzee Germany, and accurately so. I mean, at the end of the day, when a veteran Paralympian applies for a chairlift in their home and you recommend to them that that they apply for having it subsidized for the state to murder them. That's very much 1930s Germany stuff. There's what's happening to those with autism in Australia currently, where we're being treated like parasites by the very party that called out the now opposition for doing the exact same thing around 2014 with people with disabilities in general. We've got Iceland talking about the way that they've eliminated Jewishness eliminated Down syndrome in the same way that Germans in the 1940s talked about quote unquote eliminating Jewishness. And yes, those two things are adjacent because they were adjacent in the Holocaust as well. That's literally what we're dealing with. Now, knowing this is an info dump, I'm sure most people probably haven't gotten this far. Most people have probably switched off and said, nah. But TLDR, why listen to that guy? And that's probably part of the problem. I'm expecting a tune out timestamp on this of about 1 minute, 2 minutes, who knows. But it is what it is. And sadly, that's the point. Those with autism are constantly put in our place. We're told we don't fit in. You're so weird, yada yada. You're a freak, blah blah blah. Comparing people of different colors to primates is rightly condemned, but not treating those with disability, in particular those of us who are neurodiverse, in the exact same manner. And you wind up with some of the biggest advocates for quote unquote diversity, equity, and inclusion being complete hypocrites. Exactly how Christ described the Pharisees. When he said you expect all these people to carry all these back-breaking heavy loads, but you won't pick up your left with one finger to pick up a tiny little speck of straw. Because that's what we're dealing with. That's the identitarianism of the world. And it's never okay. Disabled lives matter. Autistic lives matter. Because the reality is that as eugenics and its history has repeatedly shown, when disabled lives stop mattering, the next cab off the rank is a racial minority or an ethnic minority, and then following that, the poor. That's history. Whether you look at what went on in Germany in the 1930s and 1940s, or what was going on in Britain around 1934 with legislation that the UK Fabians were trying to introduce to sterilise people with disabilities, in addition to being ideological architects of the horrors inflicted on Australia's stolen generations. So I know this video has gone on for nearly 40 minutes. I don't know who will watch it. I'm not expecting much. But who knows? If you like these long form videos, I guess like and subscribe. I don't know when I'll do another one, or maybe I'll get more inspired to. Who knows? But my hope is that someone out there sees this who needs to see it. Hopefully on both sides of the spectrum to go, maybe I need to rethink my attitudes about disability. Maybe I need to stop pretending that hiding behind the plight of one minority or one group of victims of violence makes it acceptable for me to be bigoted towards another group of people who are a minority, or that me or that them fighting to prevent violence against the vulnerable justifies them excusing, enabling, or inciting violence against another group of vulnerable people. Maybe it'll make them rethink what autism actually is, what it looks like. Because I know I present nothing like Rain Man. Right now I'm not stimming. Other videos when I'm nervous I am. So, yeah. Hopefully this makes people think. You know what? I originally went with a catchphrase for this. It's based on Jerry Springer. Jerry Springer, you know, he was always ironic when he used it. Be kind to one another, because let's face it. Yeah, the Jerry Springer Show. The Jerry Springer Show. Anyone who's seen that, yeah, I didn't know how kind people were on that to one another. But no, I'm gonna use it genuinely, and I'm gonna start signing off my videos with it. Because it's true, and it really is what people need to, I think, start to understand. And so I'm gonna sign off. You know, if you want to like, fantastic. If you want to subscribe, great. I don't know what's gonna happen with this channel. If I can bring it back from the brink, fantastic. If not, no, it was worth trying anyway. And you never know who this is gonna help. But in saying all that, everyone, until next time, be kind to yourselves and to one another, because each and every one of you deserve that.